In the elegant ballroom of Riverside Country Club, a widowed mother was about to deliver what should have been the proudest moment of her life. What started as a heartfelt wedding toast took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her daughter's public rejection. Audrey Maxwell wasn't your typical mother of the bride. For 2 years since her husband's death, she had sacrificed everything, working double shifts and spending her life savings, to give her daughter Emma the perfect wedding, known for her unwavering devotion to family traditions and the precious heirloom necklace that represented 3 generations of Maxwell women's love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The kitchen table had become a battlefield of spreadsheets, receipts, and mounting anxiety. Audrey Maxwell pushed her reading glasses up her nose and stared at the numbers that seemed to blur together in the lamplight. 3 weeks until Emma's wedding, and the calculations told a story she didn't want to acknowledge. She'd spent nearly everything: the catering deposit, the dress alterations. The flowers that Emma had insisted were absolutely perfect, despite costing more than Audrey's grocery budget for 2 months. Each line item on her carefully maintained list represented another slice of her dwindling savings account, another sacrifice made in the name of giving her daughter the wedding she deserved. Audrey's fingers traced the edge of a faded photograph tucked between the papers. David at Sarah's high school graduation, his arm around Emma's shoulders, both of them laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. The image blurred as tears she refused to shed gathered in her eyes. He should have been here for this. He should have been the one walking Emma down the aisle, the one giving toasts and dancing with their daughter. Instead, it was just her, scrambling to fill both roles while trying not to let anyone see how desperately she was drowning. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Another day closer to the wedding. Another day of pretending she had everything under control. Audrey gathered the papers into a neat pile, her movements precise despite the exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. Order. Control. These were the things she could manage, even when everything else felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She made her way to the bedroom, pausing at the vanity where David's cologne bottle still sat, gathering dust. Her reflection in a mirror showed a woman who looked older than her 52 years, worry lines etched deeper than they'd been even a year ago. But behind the fatigue, there was still the determined set to her jaw that had carried her through David's funeral, through learning to balance 2 jobs, through all the moments when giving up would have been easier. From the bottom drawer of the vanity, she withdrew a small velvet box, its burgundy fabric worn soft from decades of careful handling. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Well, James's great-aunt Cordelia is coming after all, and she'll need to be seated with the family, but not too close to Cousin Richard, because they had that falling out over the inheritance, and Emma's words tumbled over each other in a rush of wedding logistics that made Audrey's head spin. Emma, she interrupted gently. Honey, slow down, we can figure this out. Mrs. Morrison mentioned they'd handle the final seating arrangements with the venue coordinator. There was a pause, and when Emma spoke again, her tone had shifted, cooler somehow. Right, I forgot you 2 had talked about that. Mom, I know you mean well, but maybe it would be better if you let Patricia handle the coordination stuff from here on out. She knows their family better, and she has experience with these kinds of events. The words hit Audrey like a physical blow, even though Emma's voice remained carefully neutral. These kinds of events. As if Audrey had never thrown a party, never organized a celebration, never poured her heart into making occasions special for her daughters. I understand, Audrey managed, though her grip on the phone had tightened until her knuckles went white. I just want everything to be perfect for you. I know you do, Mom. And it will be. It's just, well, the Morrisons have certain expectations, you know, and I want to fit in with James's family. They're going to be my family, too. What about your real family? The question burned on Audrey's tongue, but she swallowed it down. Of course. Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Oh, and I might not be able to make it to Sunday dinner this week. James's parents invited us to their country club for brunch, and it's kind of a big deal. But I'll call you, okay? The line went dead before Audrey could respond. leaving her staring at the phone and feeling more alone than she had since the night David died. When had Emma started pulling away? When had her daughter's voice taken on that polite, distant tone, usually reserved for acquaintances and coworkers? Audrey set the phone aside and opened the necklace box again. The pearl seemed to glow in the dim light, a tangible link to the women who had worn it before her. David's mother, who had raised 5 children during the Depression. His grandmother, who had survived the Spanish flu and 2 world wars. Generations of Maxwell women who had understood what it meant to sacrifice for family, to love fiercely and without reservation. Saturday morning came with a kind of crisp October air that made promises of perfect wedding weather. Audrey loaded her catering supplies into the back of her second-hand Honda, the same ritual she'd performed every weekend for the past 2 years. The Hendersons' anniversary party would pay for the final dress fitting and maybe a small emergency fund. If Emma needed any last-minute adjustments, Audrey wanted to be prepared. Rosa Martinez was already waiting in the Hendersons' driveway when Audrey arrived, her friend's reliable presence, a comfort in the chaos of Audrey's current existence. "You look tired, Mija," Rosa said, shouldering one of the heavy thermal containers without being asked. They'd worked enough events together that their partnership had become seamless, a dance of efficiency born from necessity and genuine friendship. "I'm fine," Audrey replied automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. Rosa had been her lifeline since David's death, the one person who understood what it meant to rebuild a life from the ashes of loss. 3 weeks, Rosa observed as they began setting up in the Hendersons' pristine kitchen. "You ready for this?" Audrey's hands stilled over the hors d'oeuvre tray. "I have to be, don't I?" The party was a success, as their catering jobs usually were. Audrey had a gift for making food that tasted like love, for creating an atmosphere that made people feel welcomed and cherished. She moved through the afternoon with practiced grace, refilling serving platters and accepting compliments with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was during the quiet of cleanup that Mrs. Henderson approached her, an elderly woman whose own daughter had married into Columbus society the previous year. "Audrey, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but how are you holding up? Planning a wedding is exhausting, even under the best circumstances." The kindness in the older woman's voice nearly undid her. "I'm managing," Audrey said, focusing intently on wrapping leftover cake. "You know, when my Margaret married into the Ashworth family, I felt so out of place at first. All their traditions and expectations. It was like learning a foreign language." Mrs. Henderson's voice was gentle, understanding. "But I learned that the most important thing isn't fitting into their world. It's making sure your daughter knows she doesn't have to choose between loving you and loving her new family." The words followed Audrey home, echoing in her mind as she made her solitary dinner and tried to lose herself in meaningless television shows. By evening, the restlessness had grown unbearable, and she found herself driving to Greenwood Cemetery as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. David's headstone was simple granite, etched with his name, dates, and the words "beloved husband and father." Audrey knelt in the grass beside it, her fingers tracing the letters worn smooth by weather and her frequent visits. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," she whispered to the gathering dusk. "Emma's pulling away, and I don't know how to hold on without pushing her further. She's embarrassed by us, David. By me. By everything we taught her about what matters." A gentle breeze stirred the oak tree overhead, sending a shower of golden leaves dancing around her. In the rustling branches she could almost hear David's voice, patient and understanding as always. "Love her anyway, Audrey. Love her exactly as she is, even when it hurts." "The necklace," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was going to save it for her first child, pass it down the way it was passed to me. But maybe she needs it now. Maybe she needs to remember where she comes from, even if she's trying so hard to forget." The drive home felt different somehow, as if the conversation with David's memory had lifted some invisible weight from her shoulders. Back in her bedroom, Audrey opened the velvet box one final time, studying the delicate craftsmanship that had survived 3 generations of love and loss. Emma would wear the Maxwell necklace on her wedding day, whatever tensions existed between them, whatever changes marriage would bring to their relationship. Her daughter would carry this piece of family history into her new life. It would be Audrey's gift and her blessing, a tangible reminder that some bonds couldn't be broken by time or distance, or the pull of a different world. As she prepared for bed, Audrey felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The wedding would be beautiful, Emma would be radiant, and for one perfect moment, mother and daughter would be connected by the weight of tradition and the unspoken promise that love, however complicated, endures. Outside her window, the October night was clear and full of stars, each one a distant light in the darkness, holding steady despite the vast emptiness around them. Like hope, like faith, like a mother's love that burns constant and true, even when it's not returned in equal measure. The necklace would be her final gift to Emma's childhood, her last chance to show her daughter that being a Maxwell woman meant something precious and enduring. Whatever came after the wedding, whatever changes the future would bring, Emma would face them wearing the love of generations around her throat, whether she understood its value or not. The decision to give Emma the necklace had brought Audrey a measure of peace, but that fragile tranquility shattered the moment she walked into Morrison & Associates Real Estate for the rehearsal dinner planning meeting. The building's marble lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers, its polished surfaces reflecting a world of wealth and privilege that made Audrey acutely aware of her worn coat and practical shoes. Patricia Morrison emerged from the elevator like a vision in cashmere and pearls, her smile perfectly calibrated, warm enough to appear welcoming, distant enough to maintain hierarchy. "Audrey, how lovely to see you again." Her voice carried the practiced sweetness of someone accustomed to managing social situations with surgical precision. "Mrs. Morrison," Audrey replied, accepting the brief air kiss that somehow managed to avoid actual contact. "Thank you for organizing this meeting." "Please, call me Patricia. We're practically family now." The words were delivered with such practiced enthusiasm that they almost sounded genuine. "James is waiting in the conference room with the caterer. I do hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of selecting someone who specializes in intimate gatherings. The Riverside Country Club has very specific requirements, you understand." Audrey nodded, though she felt a familiar stab of inadequacy. Her own catering experience apparently didn't qualify as expertise in Patricia's world. They rode the elevator in silence, the soft jazz music failing to fill the growing tension between them. The conference room overlooked the town's historic district, where autumn leaves painted the streets in shades of gold and crimson. James stood at the windows, his tall frame silhouetted against the afternoon light, while Emma sat at the mahogany table, her laptop open and her attention divided between the screen and the elegantly dressed woman beside her. "Mom!" Emma's smile seemed forced, her voice carrying that overly bright tone that signaled anxiety. "You remember Vivian Ashworth, James's cousin? She's helping coordinate the dinner details." Vivian rose with fluid grace, extending a manicured hand. "Mrs. Maxwell, such a pleasure. Emma's told us so much about you." The words were polite, but her eyes performed a swift assessment, taking in Audrey's department store dress, her modest jewelry, the slight calluses on her hands that spoke of manual labor. "Wonderful to meet you," Audrey replied, settling into the chair across from them. The leather was butter-soft, probably worth more than her monthly salary at the bank. Patricia positioned herself at the head of the table, with the natural authority of someone who had orchestrated countless social events. "Now then, I thought we could review the menu selections and discuss the seating arrangements. The club's executive chef has prepared several options that should please our guests." As Patricia launched into descriptions of truffle-infused this and locally sourced that, Audrey found herself wondering when wedding planning had become so complicated. When she and David had married, they'd celebrated with a potluck reception in the church basement. And it had been perfect because it was filled with love and laughter and people who truly cared about their happiness. "The salmon Wellington sounds lovely," Emma said, scribbling notes with the intensity of someone preparing for battle. "And the spring vegetable tart should accommodate the vegetarians." "Excellent choices," Patricia approved, "though we might want to consider offering a more traditional option as well. Some of our older guests have rather conservative palates." Audrey cleared her throat gently. "If I may suggest, I've found that honey-glazed ham works beautifully for mixed gatherings. It's elegant but familiar, and most people enjoy it." The silence that followed was barely perceptible, but Audrey felt it like a physical weight. Patricia's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. How thoughtful of you to offer, Audrey. Though I think we'll stick with the club's recommendations. They really do know their clientele best. Emma didn't meet her mother's eyes, her attention suddenly absorbed by her laptop screen. The rejection stung more than it should have, especially when Audrey realized that Emma hadn't even attempted to support her suggestion. Of course, Audrey said quietly, folding her hands in her lap. I'm sure whatever you choose will be perfect. The meeting continued with discussions of flowers, linens, and seating charts. Audrey contributed when directly asked, but increasingly felt like a spectator at her own daughter's wedding planning. Every suggestion was met with polite consideration and gentle redirection toward Patricia's preferences. Now, about the guest speakers, Patricia said, consulting her leather-bound planner. James will say a few words about Emma, of course, and his father plans to share some family history. Audrey, did you want to speak as well? The question felt loaded, as if Patricia was testing her to see if she understood her place in the hierarchy. Audrey glanced at Emma, hoping for some signal of what her daughter wanted, but Emma was absorbed in responding to a work email, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I'd like to say something, Audrey said carefully. Nothing long, just a few words about Emma and how proud I am of the woman she's become. Lovely, Patricia murmured, making a note. Perhaps we could keep it brief, though? The club does prefer to maintain a certain flow to these events. James finally spoke up from his position by the windows. Mom, I think it's important that Mrs. Maxwell have the chance to speak. It's Emma's night, too, and her family should be represented. His words were kind, but they highlighted the very dynamic that made Audrey's chest tight with anxiety. Her family needed to be, quote, represented, as if they were visiting dignitaries from a foreign country, rather than the bride's own flesh and blood. Emma looked up from her laptop, finally engaging with the conversation. Mom, you know how nervous public speaking makes you. Are you sure you want to do that? The concern in Emma's voice might have been touching if Audrey hadn't recognized the underlying message. Please don't embarrass me. It was the same tone Emma had used when declining to bring James to family barbecues, when she'd started visiting less frequently, when she'd begun creating careful distance between her old life and her new one. I'll be fine, sweetheart, Audrey said, though her throat felt tight. I've been speaking in public since before you were born. Church committees, PTA meetings, your father's memorial service. The last words came out sharper than she'd intended, carrying an edge of defensiveness that made Emma wince. Vivian leaned forward with the eager expression of someone sensing drama. Oh, you were in the PTA? That's so admirable. I always say that public education needs more parental involvement. The condescension was subtle, but unmistakable. The implication that Audrey's involvement in public education was somehow quaint, like a hobby rather than a serious commitment to her children's futures. Yes, Audrey replied evenly. I was president for 3 years. We raised enough money to fund new computer labs and after-school programs. How wonderful, Patricia interjected smoothly, clearly eager to move past the tension. Now, shall we discuss the timeline for the evening? As the meeting wound down with discussions of arrival times and photography schedules, Audrey found herself studying her daughter. When had Emma learned to navigate these social waters so skillfully? When had she begun to see her mother's world as something to be managed rather than celebrated? The revelation came as they gathered their things to leave. Patricia was speaking quietly with Vivian near the windows when her voice carried just far enough for Audrey to overhear. The girl's certainly improved since she started working downtown. You'd hardly know she came from, well, more modest circumstances. Emma heard it too. Audrey saw the flush creep up her daughter's neck, the way her shoulders tensed as she packed her laptop with unnecessary care. But instead of defending her family or challenging the comment, Emma simply pretended not to hear, her silence serving as tacit agreement. In the elevator, they stood side by side in suffocating quiet. Audrey wanted to reach out, to bridge the growing chasm between them, but she couldn't find words that wouldn't sound like accusations or pleas. The dinner will be beautiful, she finally said as they reached the lobby. Yes, Emma replied, her voice carefully neutral. Patricia has excellent taste. They parted ways in the parking lot, Emma heading back to Columbus and her life of careful social climbing, while Audrey drove home to her modest house filled with memories of a simpler time when love had been enough, when family meant something more than an obligation to be managed. That evening, as she heated leftover soup for dinner, Audrey found herself wondering if she was losing her daughter to a world that saw the Maxwell family as a liability to be minimized, rather than a foundation to be cherished. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration of Emma's happiness, but increasingly it felt like a careful erasure of everything that had shaped her into the woman she'd become. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the promise of winter and change. In 2 weeks, Emma would become a Morrison, gaining entry to a world of privilege and polish. The question that haunted Audrey's quiet house was whether, in gaining that new identity, her daughter would lose the essential parts of herself that truly mattered. The question that haunted Audrey's quiet house was whether, in gaining that new identity, her daughter would lose the essential parts of herself that truly mattered. As dawn broke on Emma's wedding day, that question seemed to hang in the crisp October air like morning mist, beautiful but fragile, ready to dissipate at the first harsh word. Audrey had been awake since 4:30, her internal clock refusing to acknowledge that this was supposed to be a day of rest and celebration. She moved through her morning routine with the deliberate precision of someone who knew that staying busy was the only way to keep anxiety at bay. The coffee was stronger than usual, her hands steadier than they had any right to be as she measured ingredients for Emma's favorite breakfast. French toast with cinnamon and vanilla, the same recipe she'd made every Christmas morning since Emma was 6 years old. It was a tradition born from necessity. David had always worked construction jobs that didn't stop for holidays, and Audrey had wanted to create something special that was entirely theirs. The smell of butter sizzling in the cast-iron skillet filled the kitchen with warmth and memory. By 7 o'clock, she was at Emma's apartment in Columbus, using the spare key her daughter had given her months ago when the wedding planning had intensified. Emma was still asleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been during their strained conversations of recent weeks. The apartment was immaculate, every surface cleared and organized with the same meticulous attention Emma brought to her marketing campaigns. Wedding dress hanging in the closet, shoes arranged by the door, makeup and hair accessories laid out on the bathroom counter with military precision. It was the home of someone who had learned to control her environment because she couldn't control the deeper currents of her life. Audrey unpacked the thermal container of French toast, arranging it on Emma's good china alongside fresh strawberries, and the maple syrup David had always insisted was the real stuff, not that corn syrup nonsense. The familiar ritual grounded her, connecting this momentous day to all the ordinary mornings that had led them here. "Mom?" Emma's voice came from the bedroom doorway, thick with sleep and surprise. "What time is it? I thought you weren't coming until noon." "I wanted to make you breakfast," Audrey said simply, gesturing to the table. "Your favorite." I thought it might be nice to have a quiet moment together before everything gets crazy." Emma's expression softened, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to climb into Audrey's lap during thunderstorms, seeking comfort and safety in her mother's arms. "French toast," she said, a genuine smile breaking across her face. "I haven't had your French toast in months." They ate together at the small dining table, the morning light streaming through the windows and painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Emma seemed to relax as they talked about inconsequential things, the weather forecast, the florist's final delivery schedule, whether the photographer would arrive on time, safe topics that didn't require them to navigate the minefield of their changing relationship. "I have something for you," Audrey said when they'd finished eating, her heart beginning to race with nervous anticipation. She reached into her purse and withdrew the familiar velvet box, its burgundy surface worn smooth by generations of loving hands. Emma's eyes widened as she recognized it. "Mom, is that your great-grandmother's necklace? The one David gave me on our 10th anniversary." Audrey opened the box carefully, revealing the delicate gold filigree and perfect pearl that seemed to capture and hold the morning light. "I've been saving it for today. For you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with emotion neither woman quite knew how to express. Emma reached out tentatively, her fingers barely brushing the gold chain as if it might disappear at her touch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and Audrey heard the genuine awe in her voice. "But Mom, this is yours." "Daddy gave it to you. And now I'm giving it to you." Audrey lifted the necklace from its velvet bed, the chain catching the light as it moved. "This necklace has been worn by 3 generations of Maxwell women on the most important days of their lives. Your great-grandmother wore it when she married your great-grandfather in 1943, the day before he shipped out to Europe. Your grandmother wore it to every important family event until the day she died. And I wore it on our anniversary every year until your father passed away." Emma's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back quickly, her composure wavering for the first time in weeks. "Mom, I can't take this. It means too much to you." "It means everything to me," Audrey corrected gently, "which is exactly why I want you to have it. This necklace represents love that endures, Emma. Love that survives separation and loss and all the changes that life brings. I want you to carry that with you today and every day after." She moved behind Emma's chair, her hands steady as she fastened the clasp at the nape of her daughter's neck. The pearl settled perfectly at the hollow of Emma's throat, the gold filigree elegant against her olive skin. In the mirror across the room, Audrey could see how perfectly the necklace suited her daughter, how it seemed to bring out depths in her eyes that had been hidden beneath layers of social ambition and careful control. "It's perfect," Emma breathed, her fingers tracing the pearl's smooth surface. "It feels important, like it means something." "It does mean something," Audrey said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means you're loved. It means you belong to something bigger than yourself. It means that no matter how far you travel or how much you change, you'll always be a Maxwell woman, and that's something to be proud of." For a moment, mother and daughter simply looked at each other in the mirror, connected by gold and pearl and the weight of family history. Emma's carefully constructed walls seemed to crumble slightly, revealing glimpses of the girl who had once believed her mother could fix anything with a hug and a homemade cookie. "Thank you," Emma said finally, turning to embrace her mother with a fierceness that reminded Audrey of childhood skinned knees and teenage heartbreaks. "I love you, Mom. I know I haven't been. I know things have been weird between us lately, but I do love you." "I love you too, sweetheart," Audrey whispered against her daughter's hair, "more than you'll ever know." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the hair and makeup team, a flurry of professional efficiency that transformed Emma's peaceful apartment into a bridal preparation command center. Audrey retreated to a corner chair, content to watch her daughter be pampered and primped while the necklace caught the light with every movement of Emma's head. But as the morning progressed, she noticed Emma's growing restlessness. Her daughter kept touching the necklace, adjusting its position, checking her reflection with increasing frequency. When Miranda, the makeup artist, commented that the necklace looked very vintage, Emma's smile became strained. "It belonged to my great-grandmother," Emma explained, but her voice carried a defensive edge that made Audrey's chest tighten with worry. "How sweet," Miranda replied, with the kind of polite dismissal that suggested vintage was synonymous with outdated. "Very sentimental." By the time they left for the church, Emma had adjusted the necklace so many times that Audrey wondered if her daughter was beginning to see it not as a symbol of love and heritage, but as a burden she wasn't sure she wanted to carry into her new life. The thought followed them to St. Matthew's Episcopal, where the final preparations would soon give way to the ceremony that would change everything. As Audrey helped Emma from the car, she noticed her daughter's hand flutter once more to the necklace, her expression troubled in a way that made Audrey's heart skip with premonition. The thought followed them to St. Matthew's Episcopal, where the final preparations would soon give way to the ceremony that would change everything. As Audrey helped Emma from the car, she noticed her daughter's hand flutter once more to the necklace, her expression troubled in a way that made Audrey's heart skip with premonition. The autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke, a reminder that even the most beautiful seasons must come to an end. St. Matthew's stood like a fortress of weathered stone against the crisp October sky, its Gothic windows catching the afternoon light and throwing colored shadows across the manicured grounds. The Morrison family had worshipped here for 4 generations, their names etched into memorial plaques and stained glass windows that spoke of old money and older traditions. Audrey felt the weight of that history as she walked through the heavy oak doors, acutely aware that she was stepping into a world where her family's 2-decade membership seemed insignificant by comparison. The sanctuary buzzed with controlled activity as guests filtered in, their conversations a symphony of polite murmurs and social positioning. Audrey recognized the careful choreography of high society, the strategic air kisses, the subtle assessments of clothing and jewelry, the way certain families gravitated toward each other while maintaining careful distances from others. The Maxwell side of the church seemed sparse by comparison, filled with David's former co-workers, neighbors, and the handful of relatives who had made the trip from neighboring towns. Mrs. Maxwell. Pastor Williams approached with his characteristic warmth, his presence a welcome anchor in the sea of unfamiliar faces. What a beautiful day for a wedding! Emma looks radiant. Thank you, Pastor, Audrey replied, grateful for his genuine smile. She's nervous, but happy. As she should be. Marriage is a sacred commitment, but also a joyous celebration. His eyes crinkled with the kind of wisdom that came from decades of guiding families through life's most significant moments. And you? How are you holding up? The question was simple, but Audrey heard the deeper concern beneath it. Pastor Williams had officiated at David's funeral, had watched her struggle through the first raw months of widowhood, had seen her gradually rebuild her life around the needs of her daughters. I'm proud of her, Audrey said, and meant it. Despite the complicated emotions churning in her chest, she's worked so hard to build the life she wanted. Before Pastor Williams could respond, Patricia Morrison swept toward them in a cloud of Chanel and confidence, her coral dress perfectly coordinated with the wedding colors. Pastor Williams, how wonderful to see you again. The sanctuary looks absolutely perfect. Mrs. Morrison. The pastor's greeting was cordial but noticeably cooler. Yes, Emma and James chose their decorations beautifully. Patricia's gaze flicked briefly to Audrey before settling back on the pastor. I do hope the ceremony won't run long. We have quite a schedule to maintain at the reception, and the photographer is working within very specific time constraints. Audrey felt the implicit criticism that a working-class pastor might not understand the intricacies of managing an expensive wedding reception. She watched Pastor Williams's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly before he responded with professional grace. The ceremony will follow its traditional course, Mrs. Morrison. Marriage is a sacred covenant that deserves its full recognition, regardless of any scheduling concerns. The tension stretched between them like a wire about to snap, and Audrey found herself stepping forward. I should check on Emma, she said quietly. Make sure she has everything she needs. The bridal suite was located in the church's newer addition, a modern space that felt oddly disconnected from the historic sanctuary. Emma stood before a full-length mirror while Sarah made final adjustments to her dress, the ivory silk cascading around her like captured moonlight. The necklace caught the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, its gold filigree creating intricate patterns of light and shadow against Emma's throat. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Audrey breathed, and for a moment all the tension of recent weeks dissolved in the face of maternal pride. Emma was stunning, not just in the conventional bridal sense, but with a radiance that seemed to come from within, a glow that spoke of love and anticipation and the promise of new beginnings. Do you really think so? Emma turned toward her mother, and Audrey caught a glimpse of the uncertain girl beneath the polished exterior. The necklace isn't too much, is it? I keep worrying it looks old-fashioned. Sarah supplied gently, her diplomatic nature making her acutely sensitive to the undercurrents of family tension. Emma flushed. I didn't mean it like that. It's beautiful, really. It's just different from what I originally planned. Before Audrey could respond, A soft knock at the door preceded James's entrance, his face lighting up at the sight of his bride. "Emma, you're gorgeous." He moved to kiss her cheek, then stopped, his attention caught by the necklace. "Is that new? I don't remember seeing it before." "It's my great-grandmother's," Emma explained, her fingers moving instinctively to touch the pearl. "Mom gave it to me this morning. It's been in the Maxwell family for generations." James studied the necklace with the appreciative eye of someone raised around valuable objects. "It's beautiful, very elegant. The craftsmanship looks exceptional." His genuine admiration seemed to ease some of Emma's tension, and Audrey felt a rush of gratitude toward her soon-to-be son-in-law. Whatever his family's flaws, James himself appeared to understand the significance of the gift. The ceremony began precisely at 4 o'clock, with Audrey walking down the aisle on Pastor Williams's arm, a gesture of kindness that David should have provided. She took her place in the front pew, flanked by Sarah and Rosa, who had become as close as family over the past 2 years. Across the aisle, the Morrison contingent filled 3 full rows, their designer clothing and confident postures creating an impressive display of social prominence. When the bridal march began, Audrey's breath caught in her throat. Emma appeared at the sanctuary's entrance like a vision, her dress flowing behind her as she walked alone down the aisle, another absence where David should have been. The necklace glowed against her skin, visible to every guest as she passed, a quiet declaration of heritage and family pride. But as Emma drew closer, Audrey noticed something that made her stomach clench with anxiety. Her daughter's smile was radiant but strained, her eyes darting nervously toward the Morrison family section. The necklace, which had looked so perfect that morning, now seemed to catch Emma's attention with every step, her free hand fluttering upward repeatedly, as if to reassure herself it was still properly positioned. The ceremony proceeded with traditional grace, Pastor Williams's voice carrying easily through the sanctuary as he spoke of love, commitment, and the sacred bonds of marriage. But Audrey found herself distracted by the subtle dynamics playing out in the congregation. She caught Patricia Morrison leaning toward her sister, their heads bent together in whispered conversation, their gazes fixed pointedly on Emma's necklace. When Patricia's sister raised her eyebrows and made what appeared to be a questioning gesture, Audrey felt heat rise in her cheeks. The photography session after the ceremony provided no relief from the mounting tension. The photographer, a young man with artistic pretensions and little patience for family dynamics, directed the wedding party through pose after pose, while the guests waited restlessly for the reception to begin. It was during these staged moments that Audrey overheard the conversation that would haunt her for the rest of the evening. "Such an interesting choice for bridal jewelry," Patricia was saying to her friend Margaret Ashworth, their voices carrying just far enough to reach Audrey's ears. "Very authentic to her background, I suppose." "Is it real?" Margaret asked, squinting at Emma through her designer glasses. "The setting looks genuine, but one can never be sure these days. So many families have copies made to preserve the originals." Patricia's laugh was musical and cutting. "Oh, I'm sure it's perfectly real, dear, and perfectly appropriate for the Maxwell family's economic circumstances. Charming, really, how some people treasure these little heirloom pieces." The words hit Audrey like physical blows, each syllable carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. She watched Emma throughout the remainder of the photo session, noting how her daughter's natural grace became increasingly forced, how her smile grew brittle around the edges, how her hand continued to drift toward the necklace with growing frequency. By the time they reached the reception venue, Audrey could see the toll the afternoon had taken on Emma. Her daughter moved through the cocktail hour with mechanical precision, accepting congratulations and managing small talk while staying conspicuously close to the Morrison family circle. The necklace, which had been a symbol of love and continuity that morning, now seemed to weigh on Emma like a burden she couldn't quite bring herself to shed. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the reception hall in shades of gold and amber, Audrey found herself standing alone at the edge of the celebration, watching her daughter navigate a world that seemed determined to diminish everything the Maxwell family represented. The evening ahead stretched before them, full of toasts and dancing, and the ritualized joy of wedding receptions. But all Audrey could think about was the look in Emma's eyes when Patricia Morrison had questioned the authenticity of a necklace that represented 3 generations of Maxwell women's love, sacrifice, and enduring strength. The battle lines had been drawn, and Audrey was beginning to understand that more than jewelry was at stake in this elegant war of social positioning and family pride. But all Audrey could think about was the look in Emma's eyes when Patricia Morrison had questioned the authenticity of a necklace that represented 3 generations of Maxwell, women's love, sacrifice, and enduring strength. The battle lines had been drawn, and Audrey was beginning to understand that more than jewelry was at stake in this elegant war of social positioning and family pride. As the reception moved into dinner service, that understanding would crystallize into a moment that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her relationship with her daughter. The Riverside Country Club's ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, the autumn-themed decorations creating an atmosphere of elegant warmth that should have been perfect for celebration. Round tables draped in ivory linens held centerpieces of burgundy roses and golden chrysanthemums, while soft jazz played from a corner where a pianist accompanied the gentle murmur of dinner conversation. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated affair that Emma had dreamed of, the kind of event that would establish her place in Columbus society. Audrey sat at the family table, positioned strategically between Sarah and Rosa, watching the careful choreography of upper-class dining unfold around her. 3 forks, 2 spoons, and a butter knife that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She had researched proper etiquette obsessively in the weeks leading up to tonight, determined not to embarrass Emma, but now the knowledge felt hollow and performative. Emma floated between tables during the cocktail hour, radiant in her ivory silk gown, accepting congratulations and posing for endless photographs. But Audrey noticed the way her daughter's smile never quite reached her eyes, the way her hand continued to flutter toward the necklace with nervous frequency. Each time someone commented on her jewelry, Emma's response became more stilted, more defensive. "It's lovely to see family traditions being honored," elderly Mrs. Pemberton from the Morrisons' Country Club had said during the receiving line, her magnifying glass scrutiny of the necklace making Emma visibly uncomfortable. "Yes," Emma had replied tightly. "It's very meaningful." The subtle dismissal in her daughter's tone had cut through Audrey like a blade. When had meaning become something to be embarrassed by? When had family tradition become an inconvenience to be managed, rather than a treasure to be celebrated? As the dinner service began, Audrey found herself seated between conversations she couldn't quite join. To her left, Patricia Morrison held court with stories of her recent trip to Tuscany, her voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never worried about money or social acceptance. To her right, James's business associates discussed real estate markets and investment opportunities, with the casual authority of men who moved millions of dollars with their signatures. The salad course came and went, followed by what the menu described as, quote, herb-crusted salmon with seasonal vegetables. Everything tasted like ash in Audrey's mouth. As she watched Emma grow increasingly distant, her daughter's attention focused entirely on the Morrison side of the family, while the Maxwell relatives were relegated to polite acknowledgement. When Sarah tried to engage Emma in conversation about their father's favorite wedding traditions, Emma's response was curt. "We're not doing those tonight, Sarah. This is different. Different." The word hung in the air like an indictment, separating the sophisticated present from the allegedly inadequate past that had shaped Emma into the woman she'd become. It was during the transition between dinner and dancing that the evening's master of ceremonies, a professional hired by the Morrisons, announced the beginning of toasts. James's father spoke first, his remarks polished and practiced, filled with references to family legacy and business connections that positioned the marriage as much as a merger as a love story. James followed with heartfelt words about Emma's intelligence and beauty, though Audrey noticed he made no mention of her family or background. Then came the moment Audrey had been both anticipating and dreading. The microphone was handed to her with a smile that didn't reach the MC's eyes, and she rose on unsteady legs, her prepared remarks suddenly feeling inadequate for the magnitude of the moment. "Thank you," she began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I'm Audrey Maxwell, Emma's mother, and I want to share something about the extraordinary woman my daughter has become." She looked out at the sea of faces, some attentive, some politely tolerant. others openly skeptical of what this working-class widow might have to contribute to their elegant evening. But when her eyes found Emma's, seated at the head table with her new husband, Audrey felt a surge of the fierce love that had carried her through 2 years of solo parenting and financial struggle. 26 years ago, David and I welcomed Emma into our family, and from her very first breath, she was remarkable. Determined, intelligent, compassionate. She was the kind of child who would share her lunch with anyone who forgot theirs, who would spend hours helping her younger sister with homework, who made honor roll while working part-time jobs to save money for college. Audrey's voice grew stronger as she continued, drawing strength from the truth of her words. Emma achieved everything she has today through her own hard work and determination. She earned scholarships, graduated summa cum laude, built a successful career through talent and dedication. She is extraordinary not because of where she's going, but because of who she's always been. She paused, her gaze finding the necklace at Emma's throat, the gold filigree catching the ballroom's crystal lights. This morning I gave Emma a necklace that has been worn by 3 generations of Maxwell women. It belonged to her great-grandmother, who wore it when she married her sweetheart before he shipped out to World War II. It was worn by her grandmother, who raised 5 children during the Depression and never lost her faith in better days ahead. I wore it on my wedding day and on every anniversary until my husband David was taken from us in a construction accident 2 years ago. The room had grown quiet, the usual background murmur of dinner conversation fading as Audrey's words carried across the ballroom. She could see Patricia Morrison's expression tightening, could feel the subtle shift in the audience's attention. That necklace represents something that money can't buy and social standing can't provide. It represents love that endures through hardship, family bonds that survive loss and change, and the understanding that who we are matters more than what we own. Emma, you are wearing the love of generations of strong women who knew that character and compassion are the only true measures of worth. Audrey's voice broke slightly as she concluded. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become, sweetheart. You carry his kindness, his work ethic, and his ability to see the best in everyone. That's the real treasure you bring to this marriage. Not what's around your neck, but what's in your heart. The silence that followed her words was profound, broken only by the soft clink of glassware as some guests reached reflexively for their champagne. Audrey looked directly at Emma, expecting to see tears, gratitude, or at least acknowledgement of the love that had poured from every word. Instead, she saw horror. Emma's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine panic. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the silent ballroom, every word falling like a hammer blow against Audrey's heart. Mom, please. You're embarrassing me. The words hit the assembled guests like a physical shock. Audrey felt the blood drain from her face, felt the carefully constructed dignity of the evening crumble around her. Emma's eyes darted frantically toward the Morrison family section, where Patricia sat with an expression of satisfied vindication, as if this moment had confirmed everything she'd suspected about the Maxwell family's unsuitability. Emma, Audrey began, but her daughter cut her off with a sharp gesture. That's enough. Please just sit down. The humiliation was complete and public. Audrey stood frozen at the microphone, the weight of 200 pairs of eyes pressing down on her like a physical force. She had poured her heart out, had shared the most precious truths about their family's love and resilience, only to be dismissed like an embarrassing relative who'd had too much to drink. Something snapped inside her, some final thread that had been holding together her patience, her understanding, her willingness to accept Emma's gradual rejection of everything the Maxwell family represented. The necklace at Emma's throat seemed to mock her now, a symbol of love and heritage, worn by someone who found both embarrassing. You're right, Audrey said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. I am embarrassing myself. Standing here talking about love and family to people who think those things don't matter. She moved away from the microphone, but her words continued to carry as she approached Emma's table. That necklace means nothing to you, does it? It's just another piece of your past you'd rather forget. Mom, don't. Emma started, but Audrey was beyond listening. Give it back. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread through the assembled guests. Emma's hand flew to her throat, her fingers instinctively protecting the necklace, even as her eyes pleaded with her mother to stop this public confrontation. What? The necklace? If wearing our family's love embarrasses you, then give it back. James started to rise from his chair, his face flushed with confusion and concern. Mrs. Maxwell, maybe we should. Stay out of this, James. Audrey's voice was steel wrapped in velvet, polite but absolutely immovable. This is between my daughter and me. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but whether from shame, anger, or regret, Audrey could no longer tell. Mom, please, not here. Not now. When then? Audrey asked, her voice breaking despite her efforts to maintain control. When you're done pretending we don't exist? When you've completely erased every trace of who you used to be? The confrontation had reached its climax, and Audrey could see in Emma's face the exact moment when pride overtook love, when social anxiety conquered family loyalty. With shaking hands, Emma reached behind her neck and unclasped the necklace, the gold chain sliding through her fingers like liquid regret. She pressed it into Audrey's palm without meeting her eyes, the pearls still warm from her skin. Audrey closed her fingers around 3 generations of Maxwell love and walked out of the ballroom, leaving her daughter's wedding, and possibly their relationship, in ruins behind her. Audrey closed her fingers around 3 generations of Maxwell love and walked out of the ballroom, leaving her daughter's wedding, and possibly their relationship, in ruins behind her. The October night air hit her face like a slap, sharp and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of the country club, but it did nothing to clear the fog of shock and devastation that clouded her mind. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her car keys in the parking lot, the necklace clutched in her other palm like a talisman that had lost its power. The weight of it seemed impossibly heavy now, not just gold and pearl, but the accumulated expectations of generations, the burden of family pride that had just been publicly rejected by the one person it was meant to honor. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and stop signs, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind replayed the evening's disaster in excruciating detail. Emma's voice echoing through the ballroom. You're embarrassing me. The looks of satisfaction on the Morrison faces. The collective intake of breath from 200 wedding guests witnessing a family implode in real time. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the full magnitude of what had happened was beginning to settle over her, like a suffocating blanket. She had humiliated herself, certainly, but worse. She had potentially destroyed her relationship with Emma on what should have been the happiest day of her daughter's life. The mother of the bride, publicly demanding her gift back. It was the kind of scene that would be whispered about in Columbus society circles for years to come. The house felt cavernous and cold, every familiar object suddenly foreign in the aftermath of her emotional earthquake. She set the necklace on the kitchen counter and stared at it, this beautiful thing that had become a symbol of everything wrong between her and Emma. The pearl seemed to reproach her with its lustrous perfection, a reminder of love given and love rejected. The phone rang at 11:30, Sarah's name appearing on the caller ID, like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Mom, are you okay? I've been trying to call since you left. Sarah's voice was tight with worry and something else, disappointment perhaps, or anger. I'm home, Audrey said, though her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else entirely. I'm fine. You are not fine. Mom, what were you thinking? It's Emma's wedding day. The accusation hit harder than expected, especially coming from Sarah, who had always been her ally, her supporter through the difficult years since David's death. I was thinking that I've spent months sacrificing everything to give your sister a perfect wedding, only to have her publicly humiliate me when I tried to express how proud I am of her. She was nervous, Mom. You know how she gets in social situations. She didn't mean. She meant every word. Audrey's voice was flat, drained of the fire that had carried her through the confrontation. Sarah, you didn't see her face. She wasn't nervous. She was mortified. By me. By our family. By everything we represent. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for Audrey to hear the distant sound of music and laughter, the wedding reception continuing without her, as if her presence had been merely a minor interruption in the evening's festivities. "I stayed for another hour," Sarah finally said, her voice small. "Emma," she cried through the first dance. James kept asking what he could do, but she wouldn't talk to anyone. People were staring and whispering. "It was awful, Mom." Guilt twisted in Audrey's stomach like a living thing. Whatever Emma had done, whatever cruel words had passed between them, her daughter's wedding night was ruined. The first dance, the cake cutting, all of it tainted by their public confrontation. "Is she?" Audrey began, then stopped. What was there to ask? If Emma was okay, if she regretted her words, if there was any possibility of repairing the damage that had been done? She and James left early for their hotel. "She wanted me to tell you." Sarah's voice trailed off. "What?" "Nothing. She wanted me to make sure you got home safely." Such a small gesture, but it hit Audrey like a physical blow. Even in the midst of her own emotional chaos, Emma had been worried about her mother driving alone while upset. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful concern that the old Emma, the daughter who had existed before social climbing and class anxiety, would have shown. After Sarah hung up, Audrey found herself wandering through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects as if to reassure herself that some things remained constant in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. David's reading chair still bore the slight depression where he used to sit with his evening paper. Emma's childhood artwork still covered one wall of the hallway, crayon drawings of their family as stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. When had it all gone wrong? When had Emma started seeing their working-class life as something to be overcome rather than something to be proud of? When had love and tradition become embarrassments to be hidden from her new social circle? Rosa arrived shortly after midnight, letting herself in with the spare key Audrey had given her years ago, during the dark months following David's death. She found Audrey sitting at the kitchen table, still in her wedding attire, staring at the necklace as if it might provide answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. "Mija," Rosa said softly, settling into the chair across from her. "Sarah called me. She's worried sick about you." "I ruined her wedding," Audrey said without looking up. "My daughter's wedding day, and I turned it into a circus because I couldn't stand being dismissed like some embarrassing relative." "You defended your family's honor," Rosa corrected firmly. "That girl has been pulling away from you for months, getting more and more ashamed of where she came from." Someone needed to remind her that love and loyalty matter more than social status. At her wedding reception, in front of 200 guests, Audrey finally met Rosa's eyes, seeing her own pain reflected there. What kind of mother does that to her child? Rosa reached across the table and covered Audrey's hand with her own, her calloused fingers warm against Audrey's cold skin. The kind of mother who has been pushed to her breaking point by a daughter who forgot that everything she is came from the sacrifices you made. The words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened Audrey's sense of failure. A good mother would have found another way, would have swallowed her pride for the sake of her daughter's happiness. A good mother wouldn't have let her own wounded feelings destroy what should have been a perfect day. "I need to call her," Audrey said suddenly, reaching for her phone. "No." Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. "Mija, not tonight. Let her have some time with her new husband. Let her process what happened before you try to fix it." Quote dot. "What if I can't fix it? What if this is the thing that breaks us permanently?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes studying Audrey's face with the intensity of someone who had navigated her own share of family crises. "Then you'll learn to live with it, the way parents always do when their children choose paths that lead away from home. But I don't think that's what will happen." "How can you be so sure?" "Because that girl loves you, even if she's forgotten how to show it properly. Because James seems like a decent man who won't let his family poison his wife against her mother forever. And because Emma is going to realize, probably sooner than you think, that she threw away something precious tonight." Audrey wanted to believe her friend's words, but the memory of Emma's horrified face, the casual cruelty of her dismissal, made hope feel like another luxury she couldn't afford. She had gambled everything on a public gesture of family pride and lost spectacularly. As Rosa helped her change out of her wedding attire and into comfortable pajamas, Audrey felt the full weight of her exhaustion settling over her. The emotional roller coaster of the day, the tender morning moment with the necklace, the growing tension throughout the ceremony and reception, the explosive confrontation that had ended it all, had left her feeling hollowed out, scraped raw. "Sleep," Rosa commanded, pulling the covers up to Audrey's chin like she was tucking in a child. "Tomorrow you can start figuring out how to move forward. Tonight, just rest." But sleep wouldn't come. Audrey lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the evening, searching for the point where things had gone irretrievably wrong. The necklace sat on her nightstand, its gold catching occasional glints of moonlight through the window, a beautiful reminder of love that had been offered and rejected. Somewhere across town, Emma was spending her wedding night in a luxury hotel suite, probably crying into expensive pillows, while her new husband tried to understand how his elegant reception had turned into a family battlefield. The thought made Audrey's chest ache with a pain that felt physical, a mother's instinctive need to comfort her child even when that child had inflicted the wound. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows and scattered leaves across the lawn, nature's reminder that all things must change, that even the most beautiful seasons must come to an end. Inside, Audrey Maxwell lay awake in the ruins of her relationship with her daughter, wondering if love was enough to rebuild what pride and pain had torn apart. Inside, Audrey Maxwell lay awake in the ruins of her relationship with her daughter, wondering if love was enough to rebuild what pride and pain had torn apart. The dawn brought no answers, only the harsh reality of facing another day in a world where everything familiar had been altered beyond recognition. By Tuesday morning, 3 days after the wedding disaster, the whispers had begun. Audrey felt them as she walked through the bank where she worked, saw them in the carefully averted gazes of longtime customers who had heard about the scene at the country club. Columbus might be a decent-sized city, but its social circles were surprisingly small, and news of the Maxwell-Morrison wedding drama had spread with the efficiency of wildfire through dry grass. "How are you holding up, hon?" asked Mrs. Patterson, an elderly customer who had banked there for 40 years. Her voice carried genuine concern, but also the unmistakable hint of curiosity that came with wanting to hear first-hand details of local scandal. "I'm managing," Audrey replied with the same practiced smile she'd been using for 3 days. "Thank you for asking." But she wasn't managing, not really. Each night brought the same sleepless hours, the same endless replay of Emma's horrified face, the same crushing weight of regret and wounded pride warring in her chest. The necklace remained on her nightstand, untouched since that first night, as if moving it might somehow make the entire incident more real than she could bear. It was Pastor Williams who finally forced her to confront the deeper questions she'd been avoiding. He appeared at her door Wednesday evening, carrying a casserole from his wife and wearing the patient expression of someone prepared to sit through however much pain needed to be processed. "I was sorry to hear about the difficulties at Emma's reception," he said simply as she led him to the living room. Sometimes families go through seasons of misunderstanding that test everyone involved. The careful neutrality of his words brought tears to Audrey's eyes for the first time since Saturday night. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but Pastor Williams had a way of creating safe spaces for emotional honesty that made pretense impossible. "I humiliated my daughter on her wedding day," she said, the words scraping her throat raw. "I stood up in front of all her new in-laws and made a scene like some kind of deranged woman who couldn't accept being politely dismissed." Pastor Williams settled into David's old chair, his presence filling the space with calm authority. "Tell me what happened. All of it. Not what you think I want to hear, not what makes you look better or worse, just the truth." So she did. The months of increasing tension, Emma's growing distance, the subtle snubs from the Morrison family, the morning gift of the necklace, and finally the devastating moment when her heartfelt toast was rejected as an embarrassment. Pastor Williams listened without judgment, asking occasional clarifying questions but mostly letting her words pour out like water from a broken dam. "I keep thinking I should apologize," Audrey finished, her voice hoarse from the telling. "But I don't know how to apologize for loving her too much, for being proud of our family, for wanting her to remember where she came from." "Those aren't the things you need to apologize for," Pastor Williams said gently. "The question is whether your actions at the reception were motivated by love for Emma or by your own wounded pride." The words hit like a physical blow because they forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth she'd been avoiding. Yes, she loved Emma desperately. Yes, she was proud of their family and hurt by the Morrison family's condescension. But in that moment at the microphone, when she'd demanded the necklace back, had she been protecting her daughter or protecting herself? "Both," she admitted finally. "I was hurt and angry and tired of being treated like we didn't matter. But Pastor, you should have seen her face when I mentioned the necklace's history. She looked mortified, like I was sharing some shameful family secret instead of a legacy of love and strength." And how do you think Emma felt in that moment? A young woman trying to navigate between two worlds, caught between her love for her family and her desire to fit into her new life? Audrey had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't fully considered Emma's perspective. Her daughter, surrounded by people who had already questioned her background and worthiness, suddenly having her mother publicly emphasize their working-class history and financial struggles. It didn't excuse Emma's cruel dismissal, but it helped explain the panic in her eyes. "She was embarrassed," Audrey said slowly. "Not of the necklace itself, but of what it represented to people like Patricia Morrison. Our modest circumstances, our simple traditions, everything that makes us different from their world. And you responded to that embarrassment by making a public demand that ensured everyone in that room would remember the moment forever," Pastor Williams observed without accusation. The truth was devastating and undeniable. In her hurt and anger, Audrey had escalated a private family tension into a public spectacle that would follow Emma for years. Every time someone from that social circle met Emma Morrison, they would remember the night her mother had demanded her wedding gift back in front of 200 guests. "What do I do now?" she asked, feeling smaller and more lost than she had since the dark days immediately following David's death. "How do I repair this?" "First, you have to decide what you want the outcome to be. Do you want to be right, or do you want to have a relationship with your daughter?" "Both," Audrey said immediately, then caught herself. "I want her to understand that our family has value, that she doesn't need to be ashamed of who she is. But I also want her back. I want my daughter back." Pastor Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Those things aren't mutually exclusive, but they might require you to approach this differently than you have been. Emma is going to have to come to her own understanding about family and identity. You can't force that revelation through confrontation or public gestures." They talked for another hour, exploring the complex dynamics of adult parent-child relationships, the ways that love could sometimes express itself through control or demand. Pastor Williams shared stories from his own ministry, families who had navigated similar crises of identity and belonging, some successfully and others not. "The hardest part of being a parent to adult children," he said as he prepared to leave, "is learning when to step back and trust that the values you instilled in them will eventually guide their choices, even when those choices temporarily lead them away from you." Meanwhile, across town, Emma was having her own crisis of understanding. The honeymoon to Tuscany had been postponed, not canceled. James had been careful to emphasize, just delayed until they could reschedule around work commitments. But Emma knew the real reason. She couldn't imagine enjoying romantic dinners and wine country tours while her relationship with her mother lay in ruins. James had been patient and supportive, but she could see the confusion in his eyes when she tried to explain the family dynamics that had exploded at their reception. How could she make him understand the complicated shame she felt about her background, the constant pressure to prove she belonged in his world, when he had never experienced a moment of social insecurity in his privileged life? It was Sarah who finally broke through Emma's defensive walls, arriving at the newlyweds' Columbus apartment unannounced on Thursday evening, with takeout Chinese food and a determination to have the conversation Emma had been avoiding. "You can't keep pretending this didn't happen," Sarah said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken with the efficiency of someone who had brought comfort food to family crises before. "Mom hasn't slept in 5 days, you look like you've been crying since Saturday, and James keeps asking me what he can do to help." "There's nothing to do," Emma said, though she accepted the food gratefully. "Mom made her choice when she decided to humiliate me in front of everyone I work with, everyone James's family knows. Do you have any idea how that looked? How people are talking about us now? Do you have any idea how much money Mom spent on your wedding?" Sarah shot back, her usual diplomacy finally giving way to anger. "She worked double shifts for months, Emma. She gave up her vacation days, her emergency savings, everything to give you the wedding you wanted. And then when she tried to tell people how proud she was of you, you called her embarrassing." The words hit Emma like physical blows because they forced her to confront truths she'd been avoiding. She knew about the financial sacrifices, had seen the careful budgeting, the second-hand wedding attire Audrey had chosen for herself, the way her mother had quietly declined dinner invitations to save money for wedding expenses. But acknowledging those sacrifices would have meant confronting the guilt she felt about wanting to distance herself from the Maxwell family's modest circumstances. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I was just... Sarah, you don't understand what it's like. The way James's family looks at us, the comments they make about our background. I've worked so hard to fit in, to prove I belong in that world. And then Mom gets up there talking about Dad's construction work and our family struggles, and I panicked. So you threw away the most precious thing our family owns because you were worried about what a bunch of snobs might think." The harsh assessment forced Emma to really examine her actions for the first time. The necklace hadn't just been a piece of jewelry. It had been a tangible connection to generations of Maxwell women who had faced their own struggles with dignity and grace. Her great-grandmother, widowed young during World War II, her grandmother raising 5 children during the Depression, her mother rebuilding a life after David's death. "I don't know how to fix this," Emma admitted, tears finally coming after days of holding them back. "Even if I apologize, even if I try to explain, people will always remember that night. They'll remember that I was ashamed of my own mother." Sarah reached across the table and took her sister's hand, her touch gentle, despite the hard truths she'd been delivering. "Then you make sure they remember something else. You make sure they remember that Emma Morrison might have been embarrassed for one night, but Emma Maxwell was raised by a woman who taught her better than that." The conversation stretched into the evening, 2 sisters working through years of unspoken tensions and assumptions. Sarah, who had always been seen as the good daughter, the one who stayed close to home and tradition. Emma, who had been celebrated for her ambition but had somehow lost pieces of herself in the pursuit of a life her family couldn't fully understand. As James returned from his evening run, he found his wife and sister-in-law sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by photo albums and wedding planning materials, both of them crying and laughing as they shared memories of their father and stories of their mother's strength. "I need to see her," Emma said finally, her voice carrying the determination that had made her successful in her career. "I need to apologize and try to explain. But Sarah, what if it's too late? What if I hurt her too badly to fix this?" "Then you'll find out," Sarah said simply. "But Mom loves you, Emma. Even when you're being an idiot, even when you're ashamed of us, even when you choose other people's approval over our family's love. She loves you enough to forgive this. The question is whether you love her enough to be honest about why it happened in the first place." As the evening wound down and Sarah prepared to leave, Emma found herself holding one of the wedding planning folders, remembering the months of preparation that had led to Saturday's disaster. All those carefully chosen details, all that attention to creating the perfect image. And what people would remember most was the moment when love and pride had collided with shame and social anxiety. But perhaps, Emma thought as she looked at her husband's understanding face and her sister's forgiving smile, what people remembered didn't matter as much as what she chose to do next. The necklace might be gone, but the values it represented, the strength, love, and dignity of Maxwell women, those were still hers to claim or reject. The choice was hers to make. The choice was hers to make. Emma sat with that truth through the sleepless hours of Thursday night, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom she now shared with James, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on her chest like a physical burden. By Friday morning, she had reached a conclusion that terrified and liberated her in equal measure. She would have to choose between the approval of people who would never truly accept her, and the love of a family that had never asked her to be anything other than herself. The realization came with a clarity that cut through weeks of rationalization and social anxiety. She could spend the rest of her life trying to prove her worthiness to the Patricia Morrisons of the world, or she could remember who she was before she started measuring her value by their standards. The woman her mother had raised, the daughter who had learned about dignity and strength from watching Audrey work 2 jobs without complaint, who had been taught that character mattered more than social standing. Sarah had agreed to facilitate a meeting, though her diplomatic skills were stretched thin by the delicate nature of the task. She called Audrey Friday afternoon, her voice carefully neutral as she broached the subject that had been consuming all their thoughts. "Mom, Emma wants to see you. She wants to talk." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for Sarah to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Audrey finally spoke, her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been running on emotional reserves for too long. "I don't know if I'm ready for another confrontation, Sarah. I can't take being hurt like that again." "It won't be a confrontation," Sarah said, though she couldn't entirely guarantee that. "She's been doing a lot of thinking since Tuesday. I think she's finally understanding some things she needed to understand." They arranged to meet at Greenwood Cemetery on Saturday afternoon, neutral ground that held meaning for both women, a place where David's memory might provide the perspective that had been missing from their emotional warfare. Sarah had suggested it partly because public spaces discouraged dramatic scenes, but mostly because she hoped their father's presence, even symbolically, might remind both women of what truly mattered. Audrey arrived first, parking near the old oak tree that shaded David's gravesite. She had brought the necklace, wrapped carefully in its velvet box, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps it was a peace offering, perhaps a test to see if Emma's newfound understanding extended to accepting what the jewelry represented. Or perhaps she simply couldn't bear to leave it alone in the house any longer, a beautiful reminder of love offered and rejected. The October afternoon was crisp, but bright, the kind of weather that made promises about winter's approach while still holding on to autumn's warmth. Leaves danced across the manicured grounds in small whirlwinds, nature's way of reminding them that change was the only constant, that even the most beautiful seasons must give way to something different. Emma appeared at the cemetery gates precisely at 2 o'clock, her punctuality, a nervous habit that had served her well in business, but felt oddly formal in this context. She walked slowly toward her father's grave, each step feeling like a small act of courage, her hands trembling slightly, despite her determination to approach this conversation with honesty and humility. Audrey watched her daughter approach, noting the careful way Emma moved, the uncertainty in her posture that suggested vulnerability rather than defensiveness. She looked younger somehow, less polished than she had at the wedding, more like the Emma who had once sought comfort in her mother's arms during thunderstorms and teenage heartbreaks. "Mom," Emma said simply as she reached the gravesite, her voice carrying none of the practiced confidence that had characterized their recent interactions. "Emma." Audrey's response was equally simple, equally careful, 2 women testing the waters of conversation that could either heal or inflict new wounds. They stood in silence for several minutes, both looking down at David's headstone, as if seeking guidance from someone who had always known how to navigate the complicated currents of family relationships. The inscription, "Beloved Husband and Father," seemed to reproach them both for allowing pride and pain to overshadow the love that had brought their family together in the first place. "I came to apologize," Emma finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because Sarah made me, not because James thinks I should, but because I've been a terrible daughter and I need you to know that I understand that now." The words were so different from what Audrey had expected that she felt her carefully constructed defenses begin to crumble. She had prepared for justifications, for Emma to explain her behavior in terms of social pressure and wedding stress. She hadn't prepared for this raw admission of responsibility. "Emma, please let me say this." Emma's voice grew stronger, carrying the determination that had always been her greatest asset. I have been ashamed of our family, of our background, of everything that made me who I am. I've been so focused on fitting into James's world that I forgot the values you and Dad taught me. I forgot that integrity matters more than image, that love matters more than social standing. Audrey felt tears gathering in her eyes, but she forced herself to listen rather than respond. This was Emma's moment to speak the truths that had been buried under months of social climbing and class anxiety. When you stood up at the reception and talked about our family history, about the necklace and what it represented, I should have been proud. I should have been grateful that you wanted to share our story with people who needed to understand where I came from. Instead, I was embarrassed because I was worried about what they would think of us. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and painful and necessary. Emma wiped away tears with the back of her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of childhood that Audrey's heart clenched with recognition. I hurt you in the worst possible way, Emma continued. I rejected everything you sacrificed to give me, everything you worked for, everything you are. And I did it publicly, in front of people who already looked down on our family. I made you feel like your love wasn't good enough, like our traditions weren't valuable, like you weren't worthy of respect. Sweetheart, Audrey began, but Emma held up a hand, not finished with her confession. I've been thinking about what Dad would say if he could see how I've been acting. He would be disappointed in me, wouldn't he? He would be ashamed that his daughter had learned to value other people's opinions more than her own family's love. The question broke something open in Audrey's chest, a dam of anger and hurt that had been holding back weeks of accumulated pain. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He might be disappointed in some of your choices, but he would never stop loving you. Just like I never stopped loving you, even when you broke my heart. Emma's composure finally shattered completely, months of suppressed guilt and shame pouring out in great heaving sobs that reminded Audrey of the little girl who had once cried in her arms over playground bullies and scraped knees. Without thinking, she moved toward her daughter, maternal instinct overriding the protective walls she had built around her wounded heart. I'm sorry, Emma cried into her mother's shoulder. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo what I did. Audrey held her daughter tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of Emma's presence after days of fearing that their relationship might be permanently severed. We don't undo it, she said softly. We learn from it. We do better. They cried together in the shadow of David's headstone, two women who had let pride and fear nearly destroy the bond that had sustained them through the worst losses of their lives. The autumn wind stirred the leaves around them, carrying away some of the heaviness that had settled over their family since the wedding disaster. When the tears finally subsided, they sat together on the small stone bench that Audrey had placed near David's grave 2 years earlier. Emma's hand found her mother's, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of people who had comforted each other through countless crises. I don't know how to face people now, Emma admitted. Everyone who was at the wedding, everyone who heard about what happened, they all know that I was ashamed of my own mother. How do I come back from that? Audrey was quiet for a moment, considering the question that had been haunting both of them. You show them who you really are, she said finally. You stop trying to be the person you think they want you to be, and you start being the person your father and I raised you to be. Emma nodded, though Audrey could see the fear in her eyes. It was easier to apologize in private than to face the social consequences of choosing family loyalty over social acceptance. But it was a choice Emma would have to make repeatedly, in small moments and large ones, for the rest of her life. The necklace, Emma said suddenly, as if just remembering its significance. I know I don't deserve it back, but Audrey reached into her purse and withdrew the velvet box, its burgundy surface worn smooth by generations of loving hands. This was never about deserving, she said, opening the box to reveal the gold filigree and perfect pearl. This was about belonging, about understanding that you are part of something bigger than yourself, something that has endured through war and poverty and loss. Emma stared at the necklace, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time since her mother had given it to her. Not as an outdated piece of jewelry that marked her as different from her new social circle, but as a tangible connection to women who had faced their own struggles with dignity and grace. I want to earn the right to wear it again, she said softly. I want to prove that I understand what it means. Audrey closed the box and placed it in Emma's hands, their fingers brushing as the gift was transferred. You don't have to earn it, sweetheart. You just have to remember that wearing it means carrying the love and strength of every Maxwell woman who wore it before you. Can you do that? Emma nodded, clutching the box to her chest like a promise she was making to herself as much as to her mother. I can do that. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, both women understood that this conversation was a beginning rather than an ending. There would be more difficult discussions ahead, more moments when Emma would have to choose between social acceptance and family loyalty, more opportunities for both of them to practice the forgiveness and understanding that real love required. But for now, it was enough that they were talking again, enough that love had proven stronger than pride, enough that David's daughters were remembering who they had been raised to be. The necklace was going home where it belonged, and perhaps, slowly and carefully, so was Emma. But for now, it was enough that they were talking again, enough that love had proven stronger than pride, enough that David's daughters were remembering who they had been raised to be. The necklace was going home where it belonged, and perhaps, slowly and carefully, so was Emma. Yet as the days following their cemetery reconciliation unfolded, both women discovered that healing the surface wound was only the beginning of addressing the deeper injuries that had made their confrontation possible. The first sign that their path forward wouldn't be smooth came 3 days after their tearful reunion. Emma had been wearing the necklace to work, a small act of defiance against her own previous shame, when she encountered Margaret Ashworth in the lobby of her office building. The older woman's eyes immediately fixed on the familiar jewelry with the predatory interest of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Emma, dear, Margaret said with honeyed venom, how lovely to see you wearing your family heirloom again. I heard about the little drama at your reception. Such a shame when family disagreements become public spectacles. The comment was designed to wound, and it succeeded. Emma felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as she realized that her wedding night disaster had become fodder for Columbus society gossip. Every person at the reception had a story to tell about the night the bride's mother demanded her gift back, and Emma would have to face these whispered conversations for months, possibly years, to come. She managed a polite response and escaped to her office, but the encounter left her shaken. The necklace that had felt like a symbol of reclaimed identity that morning now felt heavy around her throat, a visible reminder of her family's working-class origins in a world that valued polish over authenticity. When James found her crying in their apartment that evening, the full complexity of their situation finally came into focus. It wasn't enough for Emma to apologize to her mother and accept the necklace back. She would have to fundamentally restructure her relationship with his family and their social circle, choosing between acceptance and integrity on a daily basis. Maybe we should move, Emma said suddenly, the idea striking her with surprising force. Maybe we should leave Columbus altogether. Start fresh somewhere where nobody knows about the wedding. James looked up from his laptop, confusion clear on his face. Move. Emma, my work is here. My family's business is here. We can't just run away because some people are gossiping about your mother. The casual dismissal of her suggestion revealed the gulf that still existed between their perspectives. James could afford to stay and weather the social awkwardness because his position in Columbus society was unassailable. Emma, however, would spend years being introduced as the bride whose mother caused that scene at the country club. The tension that had been building since their reconciliation finally erupted during what should have been a peaceful Sunday dinner at Audrey's house. Sarah had organized the meal as a way to celebrate their renewed family bond, but the underlying issues that had caused their original conflict remained unresolved, simmering just beneath the surface of their careful politeness. Pastor Williams had agreed to join them, sensing that the family needed guidance as they navigated this fragile period of healing. His presence was meant to provide stability, but instead it created an opportunity for the deeper confrontation that had been brewing for weeks. I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, Pastor Williams said as they finished Audrey's pot roast, his tone gentle but purposeful. And I believe there are some fundamental issues that need to be addressed if this family is going to move forward successfully. Emma tensed immediately, recognizing the tone of someone preparing to deliver difficult truths. "We've apologized to each other. We've worked things out." "Have you?" Pastor Williams asked, his eyes kind but penetrating. "Or have you simply agreed to avoid the topics that caused the original conflict?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, forcing all three women to confront the uncomfortable reality that their cemetery reconciliation had been more about emotional release than genuine resolution. "What do you mean?" Audrey asked, though her defensive posture suggested she already knew. "I mean that Emma is still struggling with shame about her family's background, and Audrey is still carrying resentment about being dismissed and undervalued. Those feelings didn't disappear when you hugged and cried together. They're still there, waiting for the next triggering event." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair, recognizing the truth in Pastor Williams's assessment. She had watched both her mother and sister carefully since their reconciliation, noting the forced quality of their interactions, the way they seemed to be performing reconciliation rather than genuinely living it. "I'm not ashamed of our family," Emma protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then why did Margaret Ashworth's comment upset you so much this week?" Pastor Williams asked gently. "Why are you considering moving to another city to escape the social consequences of defending your mother's dignity?" The question cut straight to the heart of Emma's continuing internal conflict. She wanted to believe that she had overcome her class anxiety, but the reality was more complicated. Accepting the necklace back had been a symbolic gesture, but it hadn't magically erased months of carefully constructed social climbing, or her deep-seated fear of being judged as inferior by James's family and their social circle. "Because it's embarrassing," Emma admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because everyone knows that I was ashamed of my own mother at my wedding. Because every time someone sees me wearing this necklace, they're going to remember that night and think about how pathetic it was." The brutal honesty of her admission shocked everyone at the table, including Emma herself. She had been trying so hard to project growth and understanding that she hadn't acknowledged the continuing struggle between her desire to fit in and her love for her family. Audrey's face went pale, the careful composure she had maintained since their reconciliation finally cracking. "So you're still ashamed? You're just better at hiding it now." "Mom, that's not—" "It is exactly that," Audrey interrupted, her voice rising with the pain she had been suppressing. "You took the necklace back because you felt guilty, not because you actually value what it represents. You're still worried about what those people think of us." Sarah tried to intervene, her diplomatic instincts kicking in, but Pastor Williams raised a hand to stop her. "Let them talk this through. This is the conversation they needed to have at the cemetery but weren't ready for yet." The dam finally burst completely, releasing months of accumulated resentment and fear. Emma's carefully maintained composure shattered as she confronted the truth about her continuing internal conflict. "Yes, I'm still embarrassed," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "I'm embarrassed that my mother cleans houses on weekends while my mother-in-law has never worked a day in her life. I'm embarrassed that we shop at discount stores while they vacation in Europe. I'm embarrassed that our family traditions involve potluck dinners in church basements, while theirs involve country club galas." Audrey recoiled as if she had been physically struck, each word landing like a blow against her sense of worth and dignity. "So everything I sacrificed, everything I worked for, all of it was just an embarrassment to you. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant." Audrey shot back, her own years of suppressed feelings finally finding voice. "You want the love and support we gave you, but you don't want the reality of who we are. You want the necklace because it makes you feel better about yourself, but you don't want the working-class family that preserved it for you." The argument escalated quickly, years of unspoken tensions finally erupting in the safe space Pastor Williams had created. Sarah sat frozen, watching her mother and sister destroy their fragile reconciliation with the brutal honesty they should have shared weeks earlier. But Pastor Williams didn't intervene. He understood that this explosion was necessary, that real healing couldn't begin until both women acknowledged the full scope of their feelings, including the ugly and uncomfortable ones they had been trying to suppress. "I lost my father too!" Emma screamed suddenly, her voice breaking with grief that had been buried under social anxiety and wedding planning. "I lost him too, but instead of dealing with that, I threw myself into trying to become someone else, Someone worthy of a family that didn't lose everything in construction accidents and struggle to pay for basic things. The words hung in the air, revealing the deeper truth that had been driving Emma's behavior all along. Her shame about their family's circumstances wasn't just social climbing, it was grief displacement, a way of avoiding the pain of losing the father who had been the family's emotional anchor. Audrey's anger transformed into recognition as she saw her daughter's pain clearly for the first time. Emma hadn't just been rejecting their family's values, she had been running from the reality of David's death and everything it had changed about their lives. "Oh, sweetheart," Audrey breathed, moving toward her daughter with instinctive maternal protectiveness. "You never processed losing him, did you? You just threw yourself into work and James and trying to build a different life." Emma collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing with the raw grief she had been avoiding for 2 years. "I didn't know how to be sad about it and still function. It was easier to pretend that I was moving on, that I was building something better than what we lost." The realization shifted everything between them. Emma's shame wasn't really about class differences. It was about survival, about protecting herself from the pain of acknowledging how much their family had lost when David died. Rejecting their working-class identity had been a way of rejecting the circumstances that had taken her father away. As the emotional storm finally began to subside, Pastor Williams spoke into the silence, with the wisdom of someone who had guided countless families through similar crises. "Grief has a way of making us do things that don't make sense," he said gently. "Emma, you've been trying to outrun your father's death by becoming someone he never knew. Audrey, you've been trying to preserve his memory by holding on to traditions and expectations that may need to evolve." Both women looked at him through tear-swollen eyes, recognizing the truth in his assessment. They had been fighting about identity and respect, but the real battle had been against the grief and change that David's death had forced upon their family. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, speaking for all of them. Pastor Williams smiled with the gentle confidence of someone who had seen families navigate far worse crises. "Now you start over. Not by pretending the last few months didn't happen, but by acknowledging that you're both different people than you were when David was alive. You figure out how to honor his memory while still allowing yourselves to grow and change." The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since the wedding disaster, all 3 Maxwell women understood what they were really fighting for, not just reconciliation, but the right to grieve, grow, and love each other through the process of becoming who they needed to be in a world without David's steadying presence. That understanding became the foundation for everything that followed, not a quick fix, but a commitment to the messy, ongoing work of rebuilding their relationships with honesty and compassion. The changes began slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the gradual shift from winter to spring that comes so subtly you don't notice it until suddenly the world is green again. Emma started therapy with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a grief counselor who specialized in delayed bereavement reactions. During their first session, Emma sat rigidly in the comfortable chair, trying to maintain the composed professional demeanor that had served her so well in the corporate world. "Tell me about your father," Dr. Walsh said simply, and Emma's carefully constructed facade crumbled within minutes. For the first time since David's death, she allowed herself to fully experience the crushing weight of losing the one person who had always believed in her unconditionally. She cried for the conversations they would never have, the grandchildren he would never meet, the gentle wisdom that had been taken from their family when they needed it most. "I think I've been trying to become someone he never knew," Emma admitted during their third session, the words feeling like a confession of something shameful. "Someone successful enough, polished enough, wealthy enough that his death wouldn't matter so much. Like if I could just achieve enough, I could somehow compensate for what we lost." Dr. Walsh nodded with the understanding of someone who had guided countless people through similar journeys. Grief has a way of convincing us that transformation equals healing. But sometimes we transform ourselves so completely that we lose the very qualities the person we're grieving loved most about us. Meanwhile, Audrey was discovering her own truths in the weekly meetings of the Riverside Community Center's support group for widowed parents. The group met in a circle of folding chairs, in a multi-purpose room that smelled of coffee and industrial carpet, but the conversations that took place there were among the most honest and healing she had experienced since David's death. "I think I was trying to preserve him by keeping everything exactly the same," she shared during a particularly difficult session about letting adult children make their own choices. "I wanted Emma to value the same things he valued, to honor the same traditions, to make choices he would have approved of. But in trying to preserve his memory, I was suffocating his daughter." Margaret Patterson, a woman who had lost her husband the same year as Audrey, reached over and squeezed her hand. "We all do it. We think love means holding on tight, but sometimes love means learning to let go with grace." Sarah, freed from her exhausting role as family diplomat and peacekeeper, began exploring aspects of her identity that had been subsumed by crisis management. She enrolled in photography classes at the community college, rediscovering a passion for visual storytelling that she had abandoned when family responsibilities became overwhelming. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about her own dreams rather than constantly mediating everyone else's conflicts. But it was James who provided the catalyst for the most significant transformation in the family dynamic. 3 weeks after the explosive dinner at Audrey's house, a confrontation that had left everyone emotionally drained but strangely cleansed, he arrived home from work to find Emma sitting at their kitchen table, staring at the necklace with the same conflicted expression she'd worn since reclaiming it. The afternoon light streaming through their apartment windows caught the gold filigree and made the pearl seem to glow with inner warmth, but Emma's face reflected none of that luminosity. She looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, worn down by the constant internal battle between who she had been raised to be and who she thought she needed to become. "We need to talk about my family," James said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her. His voice carried a seriousness that made Emma look up sharply. "Not your family? Mine?" Emma blinked in surprise, setting down the cup of coffee that had grown cold while she'd been lost in thought. Over the past month, James had been patient and supportive, but largely passive in the face of her family drama. He had offered comfort and listened to her processing, but he hadn't challenged her perspective or inserted himself into the complex dynamics. She hadn't expected him to initiate this particular conversation. "I've been thinking about what happened at our wedding," he continued, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized as nervousness. "And I've been reflecting on the months leading up to it, the comments my family made, the way they treated your mother and sister. I realize I've been part of the problem, Emma. A big part of it." The admission hung between them, honest and uncomfortable. Emma had been so focused on her own shame about her family's circumstances, so consumed with trying to fit into the Morrison social circle, that she hadn't fully considered how James's silence had enabled his family's subtle but persistent condescension. "I thought I was being diplomatic," James said, his voice thick with regret that seemed to surprise him with its intensity. "I thought if I just ignored my mother's comments about your background, if I didn't respond to her questions about your family's suitability, they would eventually accept you for who you are. I thought love would be enough to overcome their prejudices if I just gave it time." Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes as she recognized the truth in his words. She had been fighting a battle for acceptance and belonging, but she had been fighting it alone, even within her own marriage. The man who should have been her strongest ally had been maintaining careful neutrality, leaving her to navigate the subtle currents of class-based discrimination without support. "But I was wrong," James continued, reaching across the table to take her hand. "By not defending you and your family, by not calling out their behavior, I was essentially agreeing with their assessment. I was letting them believe that your family's values and traditions were somehow inferior to ours." The realization seemed to pain him as much as it validated Emma's long-suppressed feelings of isolation. She had sensed his reluctance to fully embrace her family, had noticed his careful politeness that never quite evolved into genuine warmth, but she had attributed it to personality differences rather than tacit agreement with his family's prejudices. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly, afraid to hope that this conversation might lead somewhere healing. "I'm saying that if my family can't learn to respect your family, then we need to establish some serious boundaries," James said with a firmness she had never heard him use when discussing his parents. I'm saying that our marriage should be a place where you never have to choose between loving them and loving me. I'm saying that I want to be the kind of husband your father would have approved of." The mention of David broke something open in Emma's chest, releasing a flood of emotion she had been holding back since their wedding night. David had always known exactly how to make her feel valued and protected, how to remind her that she was worthy of love and respect exactly as she was. He had never asked her to change or improve herself to earn his affection. His love had been as constant and reliable as sunrise. James was offering to step into that role, to be the voice of unconditional acceptance that her father's death had left absent from her life. It was a profound gift, one that acknowledged the depth of her loss while promising to help fill the void with a different but equally devoted kind of love. "How do we do that?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We start by having dinner with your family every Sunday," James said with a smile that reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. "We start by me learning to make your father's favorite recipes. We start by me understanding that being part of your family means honoring where you came from, not helping you escape from it." The conversation marked a turning point not just in their marriage, but in Emma's relationship with her own identity. For the first time since her father's death, she felt supported rather than judged, understood rather than merely tolerated. James wasn't asking her to choose between worlds. He was offering to help her integrate them, to build a life that honored both her heritage and her aspirations. That integration became the focus of the months that followed, a deliberate and sometimes awkward process of learning to blend two very different family cultures. Emma began bringing James to Maxwell family gatherings, not as a visitor from a different social class observing quaint working-class customs, but as someone genuinely interested in understanding and embracing the traditions that had shaped her. She watched with growing amazement as he learned to appreciate Audrey's cooking, asking for recipes and the stories behind them. He listened with genuine interest as Sarah explained the family's approach to gift-giving, where thoughtfulness mattered more than expense, where handmade items carried more weight than store-bought luxuries. He began to understand that the Maxwell family's values weren't inferior alternatives to Morrison's sophistication. They were different expressions of the same fundamental human needs for love, security, and belonging. More importantly, Emma began to see herself through his eyes and discovered a perspective she had lost somewhere in her climb up the corporate ladder. She was a woman shaped by resilience, raised by people who valued character over comfort, connected to a legacy of love that had survived war, poverty, and loss. The necklace around her throat became a symbol not of shame or obligation, but of that unbroken chain of strength that connected her to generations of women who had faced their own challenges with dignity and grace. The transformation wasn't always smooth. There were moments when Emma's old insecurities resurfaced, when she caught herself apologizing for her family's modest circumstances or explaining away their simple traditions. There were dinners where James struggled to connect with Maxwell family humor, conversations where cultural differences created awkward misunderstandings. But they persevered, guided by the understanding that love required more than good intentions. It demanded the willingness to step outside their comfort zones and truly see the world through each other's eyes. James began volunteering at the community center where Audrey attended her support group, discovering a world of genuine human connection that existed far from the country club's manicured perfection. Emma started cooking the recipes her father had loved, finding comfort in the familiar rituals of preparation that connected her to childhood memories of safety and abundance. The real test of their progress came at Christmas, when both families gathered for the first time since the wedding disaster. Emma approached the holiday with a mixture of anticipation and dread, knowing that the success or failure of this gathering would set the tone for all future family interactions. Patricia Morrison arrived at Audrey's modest home precisely on time, her punctuality suggesting duty rather than enthusiasm. She emerged from her luxury sedan wearing a carefully chosen outfit that managed to be festive without being too casual, designer clothing that somehow conveyed respect for the occasion while maintaining her social distance from the setting. Emma watched nervously from the kitchen window as her mother-in-law surveyed the Maxwell family home, with the evaluating gaze of someone accustomed to judging people by their material circumstances. The house, with its simple decorations and comfortable but mismatched furniture, stood in stark contrast to the Morrison family's professionally decorated mansion. The potluck dinner that had been lovingly prepared by relatives represented a different philosophy of hospitality than the catered affairs Patricia typically attended. But something fundamental had shifted in the family dynamic since their painful honesty session with Pastor Williams. Audrey no longer seemed to be performing for Patricia's approval, no longer apologetic about their circumstances or defensive about their traditions. She welcomed her son-in-law's family with genuine warmth, but without the desperate edge that had characterized her previous interactions with them. "Mrs. Morrison," Audrey said as she served Patricia a generous portion of her famous green bean casserole, "Emma tells me you're interested in the history of old family recipes. This one belonged to my mother-in-law, who got it from her mother during the Depression. It's amazing how these simple dishes can carry so much family memory, how they connect us to people we never met but who shaped who we became." The comment was perfectly polite, graciously offered, but it carried an unmistakable message. This family was proud of its history, including the parts that Patricia might consider unfashionable or humble. Emma held her breath, waiting for her mother-in-law's response, prepared for the subtle put-down that had become Patricia's signature way of maintaining social superiority. "How interesting," Patricia replied, her tone carefully neutral but lacking its usual condescending edge. "I suppose every family has its traditions." The slight pause before traditions was classic Patricia, a subtle indication that she found these customs quaint but inferior to her own family's more sophisticated approaches to holiday celebration. But this time, James spoke up with a firmness that surprised everyone at the table. "Actually, Mom, I've been learning to cook some of these recipes," he said, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of genuine discovery. "Emma's grandmother's cornbread is incredible, much better than anything we've ever served at the country club, and the stories behind the dishes are fascinating. Did you know that Emma's great-grandmother developed her own preservation techniques during World War II to help feed neighbors whose husbands were overseas? She turned necessity into an art form." The gentle correction was delivered with love but with unmistakable firmness. James was claiming these traditions as his own, incorporating them into his identity, rather than asking Emma to abandon them for his family's approval. Emma felt her heart swell with gratitude, and something that felt suspiciously like the security she had lost when her father died. Throughout the evening, Emma watched her husband navigate the complex family dynamics with newfound skill and confidence. When Patricia made a comment about the charming simplicity of the Maxwell family's gift exchange, a barely veiled reference to the modest budget that guided their choices, James responded by sharing the story behind each present, emphasizing the thought and love that had gone into selections made with careful consideration rather than unlimited resources. When Patricia questioned whether such a large gathering was really necessary for Christmas dinner, suggesting that smaller, more intimate celebrations were more refined, James talked about the warmth and inclusion that had made him feel genuinely welcomed into the family. He described the sense of belonging that came from being part of a group that prioritized connection over convention, authenticity over appearance. By the end of the evening, Patricia's resistance hadn't entirely dissolved, but it had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. She couldn't criticize the Maxwell family traditions without implicitly criticizing her son's genuine enthusiasm for them. She couldn't dismiss their values without questioning the judgment of the man she had raised to appreciate exactly those qualities of warmth, authenticity, and genuine care for others. More importantly, Emma realized that she no longer needed Patricia's approval to feel secure in her own worth. Watching James embrace her family with such obvious sincerity had shown her what true acceptance looked like, and it had nothing to do with changing herself to fit someone else's expectations. It had everything to do with finding people who valued her authentic self, who saw her background as a source of strength rather than something to be overcome. The evening's most powerful moment came when Audrey presented Emma with an unexpected addition to the family necklace, a small gold charm that she had commissioned from the same jeweler who had crafted the original piece generations earlier. The charm was engraved with David's initials and Emma's wedding date, a delicate symbol that seemed to capture the light and reflect it back with gentle warmth. "I had this made," Audrey explained as she carefully fastened the charm next to the original pearl, her fingers trembling slightly with emotion. I realized that the necklace shouldn't just represent the past, shouldn't be a museum piece that we preserve but never add to. It should grow with each generation, adding new symbols of love and commitment as our family continues to evolve. Emma touched the new charm with trembling fingers, understanding immediately the profound gift her mother was offering. The necklace wasn't a burden of historical obligation that required her to remain frozen in traditional roles. It was a living symbol that could evolve with her own life and choices, accommodating change while maintaining connection to something larger than herself. When you have children, Audrey continued, her voice thick with emotion and hope, we'll add something for them too. This necklace will tell the story of all the Maxwell women, including the ones who marry into other families and create new branches of our love. It will carry forward the best of what we've been, while making room for what we're becoming. The gesture represented everything they had learned about balancing tradition with growth, honoring the past while embracing an uncertain but hopeful future. Emma felt the familiar weight of the necklace around her throat, but it was no longer the heavy burden of shame and conflict that had nearly destroyed their family. It was the comfortable weight of belonging, of being part of something larger and more enduring than her individual struggles with identity and acceptance. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, Patricia Morrison approached Emma with an expression that was as close to genuine warmth as her carefully maintained social persona would allow. "The necklace is lovely, dear," she said, her voice lacking its usual condescending undertone. "James tells me it has quite a remarkable history. Family heirlooms like that are precious. They represent continuity in a world that changes so rapidly." "3 generations," Emma replied, her hand moving instinctively to touch both the pearl and the new charm. "Soon to be 4, I hope." Patricia nodded with what might have been actual approval rather than mere politeness. Family legacy is important, even when it comes in different forms than one might traditionally expect. It wasn't exactly an apology for months of subtle snubs and class-based condescension, but it was recognition. Patricia was acknowledging that the Maxwell family possessed something valuable, something worthy of respect, even if it didn't conform to her usual standards of social worth. The admission represented a small but significant shift in the family's power dynamics. After the guests had gone and the dishes were cleaned, the core Maxwell family, now explicitly including James as a full member rather than a visiting outsider, sat around Audrey's kitchen table sharing stories and planning their delayed honeymoon trip. The conversation flowed with the easy intimacy of people who had weathered a significant storm together and emerged stronger for the experience. "I want to visit the places where the necklace has been," Emma said suddenly, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "I want to see where great-grandmother lived during the war, where grandmother raised her children. I want to understand the full story of where I come from, not just the sanitized version I created to make myself more acceptable to people who don't really matter." Audrey smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose deepest hopes were finally being realized. "I have photographs, letters, documents that go back generations. I've been saving them in that old trunk in the attic, hoping someone would eventually want to know the stories, would want to understand that our family's history is worth preserving and celebrating." "We'll make it our winter project," James added, squeezing Emma's hand with gentle enthusiasm. "A complete family history that we can pass on to our children, something that honors both the struggles and the triumphs that brought us to where we are today." As they planned their genealogical exploration, Emma felt a profound sense of peace settling over her, a calm that had been absent from her life since her father's death. The wedding disaster that had nearly destroyed their family had ultimately led them to a deeper understanding of what love actually required. Not perfection, not the absence of conflict, but the willingness to work through difficulties with honesty, compassion, and unwavering commitment to each other's well-being. The necklace around her throat felt different now, not like a weight she carried reluctantly or a symbol of obligations she resented, but like an anchor that kept her connected to the people and values that truly mattered. She was Emma Morrison, wife to a man who loved all of her without reservation, daughter to a woman who had sacrificed everything for her children's happiness, heir to a legacy of strength that no amount of social climbing could improve upon. Outside, the December snow was beginning to fall in earnest, covering the familiar landscape of her childhood in pristine white that made everything look clean and full of possibility. Inside, the Maxwell family was planning a future that honored both their past and their dreams, secure in the knowledge that love, complicated, difficult, transformative love, was always worth fighting for. The wedding gift had been returned and reclaimed, but its true value had never been in the gold and pearl that caught the light so beautifully. It had always been in the reminder that some bonds transcend time, circumstance, and even the mistakes we make when fear overwhelms our better judgment. Emma Maxwell Morrison wore her family's love around her throat, and finally, completely, she wore it with pride. In the months that followed, the Maxwell Morrison family would face new challenges and celebrations, would navigate the ongoing process of blending traditions and creating new ones. There would be disagreements and misunderstandings, moments when old insecurities resurfaced and threatened their hard-won peace. But they would face these challenges together, armed with the knowledge that love is not a feeling but a choice, made daily through small acts of courage, kindness, and forgiveness. The necklace would continue to evolve, adding new charms for new milestones, new generations, new stories of love that transcended the circumstances of its birth. And somewhere, in whatever realm exists beyond this one, David Maxwell would smile to see his family whole again, connected not by obligation or tradition alone, but by the deeper bond of choosing to love each other exactly as they are. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. ...